picture this, right? You are in the middle of this tense, high-stakes action thriller.
Oh, I love a good thriller.
Right. So our main character is being actively hunted by the most powerful authorities in the city.
The walls are closing in.
Exactly. There are secret meetings happening in the shadows, covert signals being used to identify safe houses in, like, crowded streets.
Sounds very Cloak and Dagger.
It really is.
Yeah.
There's a wealthy sleeper agent benefactor living right under the noses of the enemy. And at the center of it all is this daring, highly orchestrated escape plan.
And this plan is designed to, what, protect his followers?
Yeah, to protect a small group of terrified followers from an impending raid. Now, what if I told you, and this is for you listening as well, what if I told you this isn't the plot of the latest Hollywood blockbuster?
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
What if I told you this is actually a minute-by-minute reconstruction of one of the most famous meals in human history, the Last Supper?
Wow. I mean, it completely reframes the narrative, doesn't it?
It really does, because, okay, let's unpack this. We usually picture it so differently.
We do. For centuries, we've been conditioned to see this event depicted as this serene, almost static painting.
Right, like the Da Vinci painting, just guys sitting on one side of a long table.
Exactly, a quiet, melancholic dinner among friends.
Mm-hmm.
But when you strip away that Renaissance art and look at the raw source material,
The actual texts.
yeah, the text, the actual historical coordinates, the political climate, the geography of ancient Jerusalem, I mean, it becomes incredibly dynamic. It's a tactical situation.
And that tactical perspective is exactly what we are unpacking today on this deep dive.
It's a fascinating subject.
It really is. We're looking at a deeply analytical presentation from the YouTube channel Vital Christian Issues.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's titled Lord's Last Supper, the Untold Version. And what they do, which is just this fascinating exercise in historical mapping, is argue that for 2,000 years we've been looking at a painting.
When we really should have been looking at a tactical map.
Exactly. They walk through the geographical, chronological, and scriptural clues, specifically the biblical texts that support all this, to present an alternative timeline.
An alternative timeline of events that, frankly, challenges almost everything we traditionally assume about that Thursday night.
Right. It's wild. But wait, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to play the skeptic here for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because redefining the timeline of the Last Supper is a massive claim to make.
It is a huge claim.
So if this presentation is arguing that the traditional timeline is, well, functionally impossible, we need to understand exactly why. Like, where does the traditional story break down?
Well, to understand where the fracture happens, you really have to start with the calendar.
Okay, the calendar.
Specifically, the ancient Jewish lunar calendar.
Yeah.
And the chronological puzzle of Passover itself.
Which is super confusing if you don't know how it works.
Exactly. The argument laid out by Vital Christian Issues is that there's a fundamental misconception in mainstream tradition.
About what, exactly?
About the actual day of the Passover meal versus the Last Supper. They are often conflated.
Okay, so let's establish a baseline for everyone listening. How did the ancient calendar actually work? Because I mean, it's not like our modern Gregorian calendar where a new day just starts at midnight.
Right. No, not at all. In the ancient Jewish tradition, a day runs from sunset to sunset.
Sunset to sunset. Okay.
As soon as the sun goes down and you can see 3 stars in the sky, you have entered a brand new calendar day.
Okay. Keep that mechanic in mind, folks, because that's crucial.
Very crucial. Now, let's look at the first month of their calendar, the month of Nisan.
Okay.
The presentation points us directly to the foundational text in Leviticus 23. It explicitly outlines the timeline.
What does it say?
It says that the 14th day of the month is the preparation of the Passover.
The preparation,
Yeah.
not the feast itself.
Exactly. The actual 7-day feast of unleavened bread, the main event does not begin until the 15th.
Okay, just so we're all on the same page here. Functionally, what is the difference between Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread?
That's a great question.
Because honestly, are they not just 2 names for the exact same party?
That is a very common conflation. People use them interchangeably today.
Mm-hmm.
But historically and textually, they are distinct, even though they're connected.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the Passover sacrifice happens on the 14th. That's the day the lambs are slaughtered.
Oh, okay.
And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the massive 7-day festival that officially kicks off at sunset.
Which, because of the sunset rule, means it kicks off the 15th.
You got it. That transitions the calendar into the 15th. So the 14th is the bloody logistical lead-up. The 15th is the holy convocation, the actual feast day.
So Leviticus 23 separates them clearly. The 14th is prep, 15th is the feast.
Precisely.
So the argument here from the source is that the Last Supper couldn't have been the actual feast because of a date mismatch.
Well, it goes much deeper than just the date. It's about the physical logistics mandated by the law.
Oh, like the actual rules for the food.
Exactly. Vital Christian issues brings in Exodus chapter 12 here. This chapter gives the exact non-negotiable mandate for the Passover lamb.
And these weren't just like polite suggestions, right?
No, these are strict religious laws. The rule is incredibly specific. The lamb must be selected on the 10th day of the month.
The 10th day, okay.
It then must be kept and observed for 4 days until the 14th day, at which point it is killed in the evening.
Let me pause you there. Why 4 days?
It's an inspection period.
What is the functional purpose of keeping a lamb in your house from the 10th to the 14th? That seems like a lot of work.
It was a lot of work, but the lamb had to be, quote, without blemish.
Oh, I see.
You couldn't just grab a random lamb out of the flock at the last second. You had to separate it, observe it for 4 days to ensure it wasn't sick, injured, or diseased.
And only then could it be sacrificed.
Exactly. Only after that 4-day observation.
Okay, I want to use an analogy here for you listening, just to, ground the mechanics of this in our modern reality.
I love your analogies. Go for it.
It's like deciding to host a massive Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
You can't just wake up on Thanksgiving Thursday, realize you forgot to buy a turkey, go to the store, buy a frozen 20-pound bird.
Oh, that would be a disaster.
It would be.
Right.
You can't expect to have it thawed, prepped, roasted, and on the table by 4 p.m. The math of the preparation just doesn't add up.
Right. You have to buy it days in advance, thaw it in the fridge.
Exactly. The preparation takes time.
That is the perfect parallel. Now, apply that Thanksgiving logic to the texts of Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Okay.
In those accounts, the disciples come to Jesus and they ask, "Where do we prepare for you to eat the Passover?"
And the presentation is saying, if they're asking that question on the 13th or the 14th, it's already too late.
Precisely.
Because they wouldn't have had the 4 days.
Right. If they're just figuring out the venue and the logistics at the absolute last minute,
Yeah.
and then supposedly sitting down a few hours later to eat the roasted Passover lamb,
They'd be breaking the law.
they would be actively violating the mandate of Exodus 12. They wouldn't have been able to fulfill the 4-day inspection requirement.
Wow. And the presentation makes a big deal about that, right?
It heavily emphasizes it. Jesus, whose entire ministry was predicated on fulfilling the scriptures and the law perfectly, would not have blatantly violated this core foundational command.
He wouldn't just skip the 4-day rule.
Exactly.
So if we follow their logic, it's chronologically and legally impossible for the Last Supper to be the actual Passover lamb meal.
Based on the biblical text, yes.
But that raises an enormous question for me, and probably for you listening too. If it wasn't the Passover feast they were eating that night, what on earth were they doing?
Right. What's the occasion?
Yeah. Why are they gathered for this highly significant ceremonial meal if it isn't the main event?
To answer that, the analysis dives into the linguistic clues embedded in the text, specifically focusing on the translation and cultural understanding of time.
Okay, linguistic clues. Like what?
Right. Like the transition from evening to night. The text states that the Last Supper began in the evening.
Which we think of as like dinner time.
Right, but in the ancient Jewish and Roman understanding of the day, evening is the twilight hours.
Okay.
It's the closing of the daylight. The sun is getting low, but it is not yet fully dark.
Oh, so it's the golden hour, the late afternoons stretching into dusk.
Exactly. It's still daytime, technically.
Yeah.
So they sit down for this meal in the evening. Jesus is teaching, they're talking, time is passing.
Makes sense.
But the key scriptural clue, highlighted by vital Christian issues, comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 30.
What happens in that verse?
This is the pivotal moment when Judas is identified as the betrayer. He takes the sop and leaves the meal to go find the authorities.
The betrayal moment.
Yes. And the writer of John specifically interjects a geographical and temporal detail right here. He writes, quote, "And it was night."
And it was night. I mean, that feels like such a throwaway line.
It does to modern ears.
Yeah, like, are we sure we aren't reading too much into a single atmospheric phrase from John? Why couldn't just be a writer setting a spooky mood for a betrayal?
Yeah.
Like, and then it was night.
It's the very fair pushback. But we have to look at the rigid rules of the Passover meal to see why this detail is actually a smoking gun.
Okay, hit me with the rules.
By strict Jewish law, The actual roasted Passover lamb could only be eaten after sunset on the 15th.
Right, we established that.
It had to be eaten in the dark, in the night.
Oh, wait, I see where this is going.
Right. The presentation's argument is this. If they were eating the traditional Passover meal, everyone at that table would have already known it was night.
Because they couldn't have started eating until it was already dark.
Precisely. They wouldn't have even started eating until the stars were out.
That is so true.
If you sit down for a midnight snack and your friend leaves the table an hour later, you don't write in your journal, and then he left, and by the way, it was night.
It's completely redundant, because the night was the prerequisite for the meal in the first place.
Exactly. The logical deduction drawn by the source here is that they sat down during the daylight evening of the 13th, transitioning into the early 14th.
So it's still light out when they start.
Yes, they had a meal, a regular supper, not the roasted Passover lamb, and they talked for hours. The Gospel of John records chapters upon chapters of dialogue.
Right, there's a huge amount of teaching that happens there.
Tons of it. By the time Judas finally takes the sob and leaves, the sun is fully set. It has transitioned from evening to night.
And that's why John mentions it.
Yes, the writer includes that specific detail to show the passage of time during this long, momentous pre-Passover supper.
Wow. Okay, you mentioned the sop a minute ago. Before we move past this moment in the text, can we explain what that actually is?
Absolutely.
Because for someone listening who doesn't know, like, ancient Near Eastern dining customs, what is the mechanical function of the sop, and why is Judas taking it the catalyst for him leaving?
Well, in first-century Judean culture, meals were highly communal. You didn't have individual plates with your own portion of food.
No separate little dinner plates.
Right. There was usually a common bowl of broth or stew or bitter herbs right in the center of the table. A sop was a piece of unleavened bread that you would tear off and dip into this communal bowl.
So it's like dipping pita bread into hummus in a restaurant today.
Similar, yeah, but with a much, much deeper social weight. To share a bowl, to dip your bread in the same dish as someone else was a profound symbol of intimacy.
Like friendship and peace.
Exactly. You did not share a sop with an enemy. In fact, for the host of a meal to tear off a piece of bread, dip it, and hand it directly to a guest was a gesture of extreme honor.
Oh, wow.
So when Jesus hands the sop to Judas, it is a glaring juxtaposition.
Because he is the betrayer.
Right. He is offering the ultimate symbol of intimate friendship to the very man who is seconds away from walking out the door to sell his life to the state.
That is heavy. It's a highly charged, culturally devastating moment.
It really is. And once Judas takes it, the text says Satan enters him, the die is cast, he leaves the room, and the writer notes, and it was night.
So the timeline completely shifts. The Last Supper happens before the actual Passover feast.
Yes, a full 24 hours before.
It's a pre-Passover supper where Jesus institutes the new covenant. But here's why this is so critical and where the presentation really gets wild.
The geography.
Yes, because if the timeline proves they couldn't have eaten the Passover meal that night, the immediate logistical nightmare becomes, where did they eat this pre-meal?
Right.
Because the traditional map we've all been handed completely falls apart if the timing is off.
The geography is where this analysis truly becomes a physical, logistical puzzle. You really cannot understand the events of this night without mapping the coordinates of ancient Jerusalem.
Okay, let's lay out the traditional view for you listening. The classic story we are usually taught in Sunday school or whatever.
Let's do it.
Jesus and the disciples eat the Last Supper in the famous upper room. Then, after the meal, they walk to the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus prays.
Right, that's the standard narrative.
Eventually, Judas arrives with the temple guards, and Jesus is arrested. But the presentation points out that if you actually look at the topography and the travel times of Jerusalem, this narrative is geographically illogical.
Completely illogical. Let's construct that map in our heads. Ancient Jerusalem was a fortified city built on hills and valleys.
Very hilly.
Very. The upper room, traditionally, is located in what was called the Upper City. This is the southwest quadrant of Jerusalem. It is the highest elevation within the city walls.
Okay, southwest, inside the walls.
Now, the Garden of Gethsemane is located to the northeast, completely outside the city walls.
So opposite ends of the map.
Exactly. And to get there from the upper room, you have to leave the city, descend steeply into a valley called the Brook Kidron, and then climb up the side of the Mount of Olives.
Just how far of a walk are we talking about here, and what is the terrain like?
It's not a casual stroll, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
You are traversing the entire width of the ancient city, navigating narrow, winding, dark streets.
And this is at night?
Yes, at night. Then you exit the gates. The Brook Kidron is a deep, steep ravine. During the spring, which is when Passover occurs, it could be a muddy wadi or even have flowing water from winter rains.
Wow,
You
okay.
have to walk down into this dark ravine and hike up the other side. Doing this at night with a group of people with no streetlights takes a significant amount of time and physical effort.
So southwest, inside the city, versus northeast, outside the city, across a muddy ravine.
Exactly. And there is a third, absolutely crucial location we have to place on this map.
Which is?
The palace of Caiaphas, the high priest.
Oh, right, the bad guy's headquarters.
Right. This is where the arresting soldiers were waiting and where Jesus is eventually taken after the arrest. According to historical and geographical records, Caiaphas's palace is also located in the upper city.
Wait,
In fact, it is practically next door to the traditional location of the upper room.
let me process this. Let me make sure I'm getting this map right.
Go get it.
If Jesus is having supper in the upper room in the southwest quadrant, and Judas leaves the table to go to Caiaphas to trigger the betrayal,
Yes.
Judas is just going next door.
Yeah.
He is literally walking down the street in the exact same neighborhood.
That is the glaring plot hole the presentation illuminates. It's a massive geographic paradox.
That's insane.
Judas leaves the upper room. He walks a few hundred yards to Caiaphas's palace. He gathers the heavily armed temple guards who are already assembled and waiting for a signal.
Meanwhile, Jesus and the 11 remaining disciples have to leave the upper room, walk all the way across the entire city of Jerusalem,
Through the winding streets.
go out through the gates, walk down into the Kidron Valley, and climb up to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Exactly.
It's like a math word problem. Train A leaves the west side at 8 p.m. Train B leaves the west side at 8:05 p.m. Where do they meet?
They don't meet on the east side outside the city.
Yeah.
Train B catches Train A immediately.
Right. If Judas goes next door and grabs the guards, he just says, hey guys, he's right down the street, let's go grab him. Why on earth would Judas and a cohort of armed soldiers wait for Jesus to take a long, slow, hour-plus walk entirely across the city? That gives Jesus ample opportunity to slip away into the dark alleys, change his route, or just disappear into the crowds of pilgrims.
From a purely tactical standpoint, it makes zero sense. The authorities wanted Jesus arrested quietly, away from the crowds, to avoid a riot.
Because it's Passover week, the city is packed.
Right. If they knew he was in the upper room, they would have intercepted him inside the city mere minutes after Judas gave them the location.
They would have just locked down the neighborhood.
Absolutely. The travel times simply do not allow for Jesus to make it all the way to Gethsemane if he started his journey from right next door to the high priest's palace.
Okay, mind blown. So where was Jesus actually eating this meal? If he wasn't in the West, where does the text actually say he was?
Well, the presentation looks at the established daily pattern of Jesus during this final week to find the answer.
His routine.
Right. Luke 21.37 establishes a very clear routine. It states that in the daytime, Jesus was teaching in the temple, which is on the far east side of the city.
Okay.
And at night, he went out and dwelt on the Mount of Olives, which is also on the east side, just across the Kidron Valley.
So his entire operational base was on the east side. He's commuting back and forth from the Mount of Olives to the temple every day.
Correct. He's staying in the east. Furthermore, John chapters 13 through 17 document a massive amount of teaching that Jesus does after the supper ends.
Right, long discourse.
4 entire chapters of deep, complex theological discourse. Only after all that speaking does the text note that they went, quote, over the brook Cedron.
Okay, synthesizing all of this, Vital Christian Issues is arguing that there is no way Jesus had this final pre-Passover supper in the upper room on the west side.
The logical conclusion they draw is that Jesus likely had this supper much closer to the eastern side, near the temple area.
Right along his usual commuting route to the Mount of Olives.
Exactly.
Which suddenly makes the logistics of the betrayal work perfectly.
It fits like a glove. Let's run the timeline again, but this time from the east side.
Okay, paint the picture.
Jesus is having supper in the east. Judas takes the sop and leaves. Judas now has to walk all the way across the city, from east to west, to reach Caiaphas's palace in the upper city.
That's a long walk for Judas.
It is. He has to brief the guards, organize the cohort, and get his 30 pieces of silver. Meanwhile, Jesus finishes the meal, delivers 4 chapters of teaching to the remaining disciples, and slowly makes his way out of the eastern gates, across the Kidron Valley, and into the Garden of Gethsemane.
And then Judas and the guards have to march all the way back across the city.
From west to east to intercept him at the garden.
The travel times finally balance out. Judas's round trip across the city perfectly mirrors the time it takes Jesus to finish his long discourse and walk to his usual nighttime camping spot.
The geography dictates the reality of the timeline.
It is a phenomenal piece of deductive reasoning based purely on the physical realities of ancient urban travel.
It really grounds the text in reality.
It does, but I have to push back here.
I figured you're mine.
Because if Vital Christian Issues is right, and they didn't eat the Last Supper in the upper room, why is the upper room even in the biblical text?
Very important question.
Right. We know Jesus explicitly sent Peter and John into the city earlier that day to secure it. If it wasn't a dining room for that night, what was it? Who owned it?
That is the pivotal question, and it shifts the narrative from a logistical puzzle into a full-blown covert operation.
Oh, I love this part.
To understand the upper room, we have to look closely at the identity of the man who owned it and the very specific instructions Jesus gave to find him.
The sleeper agent.
Exactly. Let's look at the textual evidence across multiple Gospels. Matthew 26.1, Mark 14.1, and Luke 22.91 all reference this event.
What do they say?
Jesus tells Peter and John to go into the city, and he gives them a very specific sign. He tells them to look for a man carrying a pitcher of water and to follow him.
And the presentation highlights why this is such a bizarre instruction, right?
Yes, very bizarre for the time. In first-century Middle Eastern culture, drawing and carrying water from the public wells was almost exclusively considered a woman's domestic task.
Okay, so a man doing it is weird.
Men generally carried wine or oil in skins. A man walking through the crowded streets of Jerusalem carrying a water pitcher would stand out immediately. It is a highly recognizable, prearranged signal.
It's literally spycraft. It's the ancient equivalent of meet the guy at the train station wearing the red carnation.
It's a perfect comparison. Jesus is using covert signals to bypass surveillance.
And once they follow this man to a house, what happens?
They are instructed to speak to a specific individual. The texts refer to him variously as such a man, or the good man of the house, or the master of the house.
But no name.
No name. Jesus tells them to ask this man, "Where is the guest chamber where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples?" And the text says the man will show them a, quote, large upper room furnished.
Okay, let's analyze this good man. The presentation provides some incredible socioeconomic context here about where this house is actually located.
It's vital context.
It's in the upper city.
Which is the most crucial detail. The upper city was the aristocratic quarter of ancient Jerusalem. It is where the power structures were based.
The wealthy neighborhood.
Very wealthy. The high priest Caiaphas lived there. The wealthy Sadducees, the temple elite, they all lived in the upper city. It was a highly fortified, heavily guarded, affluent sector of town.
To use a modern equivalent, it's not just Beverly Hills. It's like being the most wanted man in Washington, D.C., and your secret safe house is a luxury townhouse located directly across the street from FBI headquarters.
That is a brilliant analogy. The audacity of hiding in plain sight.
It's so bold.
You have to remember the socio-political atmosphere of Jerusalem during Passover week. The city's population would swell from maybe 50,000 to hundreds of thousands of pilgrims.
Just packed wall to wall.
It was a logistical nightmare for the Romans. The atmosphere was incredibly volatile, prone to riots and zealot uprisings. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, would travel from his usual residence in Caesarea, specifically to stay in Jerusalem during Passover, just to oversee crowd control.
Just to make sure nothing blew up.
Exactly. The city was crawling with temple guards and Roman soldiers on high alert.
And Jesus, this controversial rabbi from a poor working-class region in Galilee who is currently public enemy number one.
Yes.
He has a wealthy contact living right in the middle of this elite, hyper-militarized neighborhood.
The presentation suggests that this good man was a wealthy, powerful elite who was secretly a believer or sympathizer.
A secret ally.
Right. He had to keep his allegiance completely quiet because of his status and his proximity to the religious authorities who were actively plotting to execute Jesus.
If he was discovered harboring them.
He could lose his status, his wealth, or his life.
Which perfectly explains the intense secrecy of the whole operation. Notice why the man goes unnamed in the text.
They're protecting his identity.
Yes. The writers are intentionally redacting his name from the record because he was a high-level inside source.
Exactly. Furthermore, notice that Jesus only sends 2 disciples, Peter and John, to make contact. He doesn't send the whole group of 12.
Right, because a massive group of 12 recognizable rural Galileans walking into the wealthy aristocratic quarter of Jerusalem is going to attract immediate attention.
They'd be spotted in seconds. The authorities are actively looking for them.
2 guys can slip in unnoticed, 12 cannot.
The argument here is that Jesus knew exactly what was about to happen. He was fully aware of the political realities and the impending betrayal.
He knew he was going to be arrested.
Yes, and he knew his disciples were going to completely panic and scatter. He needed to secure a heavily fortified, highly secret safe house for his followers to survive the chaotic days following his execution.
He was setting up a panic room.
A panic room in the most secure part of the city. The good man provided this absolute perfect location because it was the last place anyone would look.
That's true. The temple authorities would scour the Mount of Olives.
They would search the slums, they would check the roads back to Galilee.
But they would never suspect that a wealthy peer in their own exclusive neighborhood was harboring the terrified, fugitive disciples of the man they had just crucified.
It is brilliant tactical misdirection.
I just love this reading of the text. It paints a picture of a leader who isn't just passively waiting to be a victim. He is actively managing the logistics of his team's survival.
Very much so.
But this brings us to a massive collision of facts that we have to reconcile.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. If the upper room was a safe house for after the arrest, what exactly were Peter and John doing there that afternoon?
Ah, yes. The preparation.
Right. The text explicitly says they went to prepare the Passover. If they aren't cooking a lamb and eating it that night, what does prepare actually mean?
Well, this is where we have to dive into the linguistic clues of preparation versus eating. We have to reconcile the traditional English phrase, go prepare us the Passover, with the timeline and the geography we've just established. Vital Christian Issues looks at the actual translation history of these Greek words to clarify the mechanics of what Peter and John were actually doing.
Okay, let's break down the wording. What are the Greek words?
The presentation focuses on the specific verbs used in Luke 22. The text says the room is furnished, and the disciples are told to make ready.
Make ready.
In the original Greek, the word used for make ready is hetoimazo. It means to prepare, to provide, to arrange.
Okay.
It does not automatically equate to slaughtering an animal and roasting it over a fire. It can simply mean preparing the venue.
Oh. Arranging the tables, setting up the reclining couches, because they didn't sit in chairs back then, they reclined.
Right.
Making sure there are provisions, checking the security of the doors, essentially securing the location and making sure the safe house is operational for the days ahead.
Exactly. The argument is that Peter and John went to the upper room in the afternoon to prepare the venue for the actual 15th Passover feast that would happen the next day.
And to establish this location as the secure fallback point.
Yes. They did not drag a bleeding lamb into an aristocratic mansion, kill it, and roast it in the upper room that night.
That would be messy. But wait, I'm going to play devil's advocate again here, because anyone who has read these texts their whole life is going to push back hard on this.
Of course. It's a big paradigm shift.
They might argue the text literally says they made ready the Passover. And then later that evening, it says Jesus sat down with the 12. Doesn't the proximity of those two sentences heavily imply they eat what they just prepared in that room?
It is a very natural assumption to make when reading the English translation. But Vital Christian Issues addresses this directly, using one of the most brilliant logical deductions in their entire analysis.
Lay it on me.
They take us back to the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 29. Let's look at the context again.
Okay.
Jesus and the disciples are eating their supper on the east side of the city. Jesus gives the sop to Judas. Judas abruptly stands up and leaves the room.
Right, we talked about this.
Now, what do the remaining 11 disciples think Judas is doing?
The text says, some of them thought, because Judas had the bag, that Jesus had said unto him, buy those things that we have need of against the feast.
Buy those things that we have need of against the feast, meaning buy the supplies needed for the upcoming Passover feast.
Oh my goodness. That completely shatters the traditional timeline.
Think about the pure logic of that moment. If we follow the traditional timeline and they had just finished eating the Passover feast,
Yeah.
why on earth would the 11 disciples think Judas was leaving the table to go buy supplies for the feast?
Right. If we go back to our Thanksgiving analogy.
Yes, bring it back.
You and your family are sitting around the dining room table. You've just eaten the turkey, the stuffing, the cranberry sauce.
Yeah.
Your uncle suddenly stands up, grabs his coat and his wallet, and leaves the house.
And what do you say?
Does anyone at the table say, oh, he must be going to the grocery store to buy the turkey for Thanksgiving dinner? No, you just ate it. The dinner is over.
It is completely illogical. The disciples were not suffering from collective amnesia.
That is so funny, but it's so true.
The only way their assumption makes sense is if the Passover feast hasn't happened yet. They're having a pre-supper, Judas leaves, and they assume that Judas, who the text notes was the treasurer of the group, and held the money back.
He's the guy with the cash.
Exactly. They assume he is going out to the late-night markets to buy the lamb, or the specific provisions needed for the actual feast that will take place the next day.
Which definitively proves they were not eating the Passover meal in that moment.
Correct.
And if they weren't eating the Passover meal in that moment, it completely validates the presentation's theory that this was a separate, earlier meal.
It connects all the dots. The timeline of the calendar, the geography of the betrayal, and the linguistic context of the disciples' assumptions all align to form a completely different, highly coherent narrative.
It's just incredible.
And the presentation provides one final piece of textual evidence to seal the deal regarding the true purpose of the upper room as a safe house.
Oh, there's more.
We have to look at the events that occur after the crucifixion.
Yes, what happens to the disciples once Jesus is actually arrested and executed? Do they go back to the upper room?
They absolutely do. In John 20:19, on the evening of the first day of the week, the day of the resurrection, the text says the disciples are gathered and the doors are shut.
Shut and locked.
Yes, the writer specifically notes they are, quote, shut doors for fear of the Jews. They are terrified of the authorities.
Naturally.
And where exactly are they gathered behind these locked doors? Acts 1:13 explicitly tells us. After returning to Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, they go up into an upper room where they're staying.
It's the exact same room.
The evidence strongly suggests it is. The tactical plan worked flawlessly. The good man in the upper city sheltered them exactly as Jesus had arranged.
That is amazing.
While the temple guards and Roman soldiers were scouring the city looking for the followers of the man they had just crucified.
The disciples were locked safely away in the VIP section of town.
Yes, in a pre-furnished upper room, behind heavily secured doors.
Wow. Okay, let's pull back and synthesize everything we've uncovered today, because this is a lot to take in.
It is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. When you take the approach that Vital Christian Issues advocates, when you look closely at the Greek translation,
When you map out the strict lunar calendar day by day,
when you overlay a physical map of ancient Jerusalem's topography, and when you think logically about the physical logistics of a betrayal, an ambush, and urban travel without streetlights,
you get a completely different picture.
you don't get a quiet, static painting. You get an incredibly rich, tense, and strategic picture of a leader navigating his final days.
It moves away from a passive theological tableau and reveals a highly active, highly aware operational leader.
He wasn't caught off guard by Judas. He wasn't just wandering blindly into a trap in the garden. He was actively managing the physical safety of his followers.
Every step of the way.
He secured a secret location using covert signals. He misdirected the authorities by eating on the east side of the city while his safe house was on the west.
He instituted a new tradition with his followers.
And then she willingly walked to the garden, knowing his terrified disciples now had a secure, pre-prepared panic room in the upper city to hide in once the chaos started.
And this is why this kind of analytical deep dive is so incredibly valuable. It emphasizes the immense importance of critical thinking and questioning inherited narratives.
Totally.
We so often read historical texts or religious texts or any ancient document with a preconceived picture already loaded into our minds. We project centuries of tradition, art, and cultural assumptions onto the words, completely obscuring what the text is actually saying.
Like we said at the start, we see the famous Da Vinci painting in our head with everyone sitting on one side of a long table, and we just assume the text matches the painting.
Exactly. But when we actually map the coordinates, when we track the lunar timeline, when we ask simple, practical questions.
Like, how long does it take to walk across the Kidron Valley at night?
Or would you send your treasurer to go grocery shopping for a meal you are currently in the middle of eating? When we do that, the traditional assumptions fall apart. But a completely different and arguably much more profound reality emerges. The text becomes a living, breathing document of human action, political tension, and tactical strategy.
It really does. It takes the story from a flat, black and white sketch to a high-definition, three-dimensional reality.
Well said.
And for you listening, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on everything we've talked about today regarding the logistics of this night, but takes it just a step further into how we view history.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the good man of the house, this unnamed sleeper agent in the upper city. He had wealth, he had status, he had political comfort.
He had everything to lose.
Exactly. He lived in the same elite neighborhood as the high priests, the very people who had the power of life and death in that city. And yet he risked all of it.
Good.
He risked his wealth, his social standing, and very likely his own life, simply by participating in a covert plan and unlocking his door for 11 terrified fugitives.
It's an incredible act of quiet bravery.
He didn't give a grand theological speech that was recorded in the Gospels. He didn't lead an army. He didn't perform any miracles. He just provided a room.
Just an unlocked door.
Right. It makes you wonder as you read through the grand sweeps of history, or even as you look at the massive volatile shifts in our world today, how many massive world-changing events only survived, only succeeded because of an unnamed person in the background, quietly leaving a door unlocked.
That is a profound thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an absolute thrill unpacking the geography, the timeline, and the untold logistics of history with you. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions, keep checking the map, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.